Good morning, and thank you for that warm welcome. Before delivering this speech, I wish to acknowledge the American Legion Media and Communications Division for writing it. And I also thank them for authorizing me to use and edit it. Also, we owe a thank you to Morton Printing Company, Incorporated, located at 511 2nd Street in Aurora, for printing today's programs. It is important to support the small local businesses. And for the veteran service organizations out here today, I recommend that you ask Morton Printing for a discount. Carl Johnson's life matters. A 90-year-old veteran in Virginia, Carl was the last Tuskegee Airman to graduate from the famed school that produced so many heroic African-American aviators. According to a recent article in the Washington Post, in 1946, the United States Army issued Carl a train ticket for a Pullman sleeping car so he could get from Texas to Alabama for his military training. Carl recalled being told by the station manager that he and his fellow black soldiers were not allowed to use the Pullman. "You have to go in coach," they were ordered. Threatened with jail if they resisted, the soldiers rode for 24 hours and were denied the use of the train's dining car as well. Despite the indignities, Carl would continue to treat his country better than many of his fellow citizens treated him. Carl would extend his military service for another 3 decades, serving in the Korean and Vietnam Wars. He would earn a Distinguished Flying Cross, 10 Air Medals, and retire as a colonel. Air Force Technical Sergeant Jason Norton and Air Force Staff Sergeant Brian McElroy were military police officers. Unfortunately, they are unable to extend their military service. Their lives were tragically taken. They were assigned to the 3rd Security Forces Squadron, Elmendorf Air Force Base, Alaska. During a deployment near Taji, Iraq, on January 22, 2006, while on patrol, Sergeants Norton and McElroy made the supreme sacrifice when their vehicle was struck by an improvised explosive device. Christina Norton said of her husband, Jason, "He was the best father in the world, and I said that before anything happened." During Brian's memorial service, Staff Sergeant Richard Cleary said, "Brian always made us laugh, and he always knew when to jump into conversation to make us laugh even more. He was a family man and really enjoyed talking to his wife and kids. His mother gave him a gold cross that he always wore around his neck to remind him to never lose his faith." Laid to rest in Arlington National Cemetery, the 2 fallen veterans share the same coffin and headstone because their remains were intermingled from the blast and unidentifiable, according to an Arlington Cemetery spokesperson. But their character is easy to identify. Just look up the word hero. At a speaking engagement in 1974, then Governor Ronald Reagan introduced returning prisoner of war John McCain. The future president asked, "Where do we find such men?" He was speaking of many veterans when he answered, "We find them in our streets, in the offices, the shops, and the working places of our country, and on the farms." In other words, President Reagan was referring to ordinary people accomplishing extraordinary things. And it isn't just the men. Grace Murray of New York was a curious child. At the age of 7, she dismantled an alarm clock just to see how it worked. Later, she became one of the first programmers of the Harvard Mark I computer and would invent the computer language known as Common Business Oriented Language, or COBOL for short. COBOL was developed in the 1950s. It was the first widely used high-level programming language and the second oldest high-level programming language. The world was fortunate to benefit from the brilliant mind of this woman, known by many friends and admirers as Amazing Grace. She was known by the United States Navy as Rear Admiral Grace Hopper. Although she died in 1992, we can emphatically say that the world is a better and smarter place because of Admiral Grace Hopper. Veterans come in all shapes and sizes: young, old, rich, poor, black, white, Christian, atheist, and every racial, ethnic, and religious category in between. They are men and women who have served or continue to serve America, and their families are diverse as well. We need to remember the wives who briefly and anxiously dreaded every doorbell ring or telephone call as their husbands witnessed unspeakable horrors while fighting in hard-to-pronounce villages that most Americans could never find on a map. We need to remember that modern military families who deal with frequent address changes, the non-military spouse's interrupted employment, and a disproportionate sharing of parental responsibilities. For what they do for us, American families should be also honored on Veterans Day. While their numbers are decreasing, too many veterans are homeless. As recently as 2014, an estimated 50,000 homeless veterans were identified in communities around the nation. That is roughly the population of Galveston, Texas. And let us remember the estimated 20 veterans a day who commit suicide, and that approximately 20% of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans have experienced post-traumatic stress disorder. Veterans still face long wait times to use many Veterans Administration's medical facilities, and the care, while often good, still needs to be worthy of the veterans who served this great nation. We should frequently remind employers that veterans have been tested under pressure, have completed unique training, and have displayed the leadership qualities that would benefit any organization. Hiring veterans is not just a way to show gratitude, it is simply smart business. While Veterans Day is an important yet symbolic way of saying thank you for your service, we should insist that our elected officials produce meaningful laws and public policies that enhance the quality of life for veterans and their families. The organizations represented by their participation in this service today, the American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the Vietnam Veterans of America, the 40 and 8, the Korean War Veterans Association, and the Disabled American Veterans are dedicated to remembering the legacy of all veterans, because what these men and women have done for us matters to America. It matters to the people overseas who were liberated from tyranny due to the sacrifices of our military members, from defeating communism, fascism, and imperialism, to liberating slaves, keeping the peace during the Cold War, and battling terrorism today. Veterans have accomplished remarkable things throughout our nation's history. Ladies and gentlemen, veterans have preserved this country that we all love.